We have dedicated our company to the service of the West and the United States of America, and we're super proud of the role we play, especially in places we can't talk about. And we love our success in the U.S. and globally. Also, we are doing in the United Kingdom and many other places. Palantir is here to disrupt and make the institutions we partner with the very best in the world, and when it's necessary, to scare enemies and, on occasion, kill them.
That was Alex Karp, CEO of US tech firm Palantir, speaking in February last year. As it happens, that was just a few weeks before British Prime Minister Keir Starmer visited Karp at his company's offices in Washington. That visit is now subject to new scrutiny, piling fresh pressure on Starmer, a politician already floundering. But why? Because of the rising urgency around the question, just how much did we know, and when, about Peter Mandelson's relationship with convicted sex criminal billionaire Jeffrey Epstein? So far, his excuse for being so chummy with Mandelson only a year ago, even though he admitted to knowing that Mandelson's relationship with Epstein continued beyond the billionaire's 2008 child sex conviction, is that the former ambassador lied to him about the details. Maybe. But it's also very clear that Mandelson, with his love of billionaires and the super-rich, was exceptionally useful to a government willing to do almost anything for a positive economic message. And that's where Keir Starmer may find himself in hot water of his own making. In an angry parliamentary debate on Wednesday, Tory MP Alex Burghardt made a revelation.
On the 27th of February 2025, the Prime Minister, whilst in Washington, visited the American data and AI company Palantir at its headquarters. The meeting did not appear in the Prime Minister's register of visits. It only came to light later. Now, Palantir, we should remember or remind ourselves, was a client of Global Counsel, the company in which Peter Mandelson had a commanding share. Later that year, Palantir received from this government a £240 million deal.
British companies couldn't compete.
That deal was granted by direct award. Given the allegations now coming to light about Mandelson's conduct, can the Minister assure the House that the Cabinet Secretary will review the circumstances around the award of that contract and assure himself that there are no other such contracts, no other undisclosed meetings, that the government is going to go through all of the communications that Mandelson sent out whilst he was ambassador, messages we must assume, some of which were sent to old business contacts, potential few business contacts, and so on.
Now, this story isn't new. In April last year, the Good Law Project reported on the visit to the Donald Trump-aligned firm Palantir's Washington site, one that the Cabinet Office admitted was fixed by the very embassy that Mandelson had taken over just a few weeks before. The Good Law Project submitted a Freedom of Information request to the government about the visit, with this result. In response to our Freedom of Information request, the Cabinet Office told us it was only an informal visit, a tour of the facilities, a short video presentation, and a meet and greet with staff members, so no minutes were kept. An off-books, unminuted personal visit with the head of a British government would be worth a lot of money to Palantir, a company looking to expand its war and surveillance technology around the world. This is footage from some of that meeting, showing Keir Starmer being personally instructed in Palantir's battlefield technology Sky Kit by the company's CEO Alex Karp. Also present was Louis Mosley, in the background on the right, grandson of British fascist Oswald Mosley and head of Palantir's UK operations. And as you can see, Peter Mandelson, our Peter, as Starmer once liked to say, was there too. Quite a packed-out audience for an informal visit, huh? So who stood to gain from the meeting? Well, as Burkhardt suggested there, one candidate is the company part-owned by Mandelson, and that has Palantir as a client. This is the website for Global Counsel, a firm that describes itself as offering global integrated consultancy services for clients working with public policy change. That's a lot of words for lobbyists. Global Counsel is pretty clear that they're in the business of helping to get government contracts for private companies. One of the services they offer companies in the tech sector is helping them to access public sector procurement opportunities, just like the ones Palantir would go on to win. And befitting a company that works to set up PFIs, its staff page is a who's who of former Downing Street advisors, civil servants, and figures connected to the Tony Blair government. But the direction of staff travel doesn't just go from former governments to Global Counsel. Sometimes it works in reverse as well. For example, there's Matt Bevington, who until September last year worked for Global Counsel, leaving around the same time that Mandelson was sacked as the ambassador. How curious. While in that role, he also worked for the PFI Promoting Future Governance Forum and penned research for the Tony Blair Institute. And just a few months after quitting Mandelson's firm, Bevington turned up as special advisor to Liz Kendall, the Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology. Now, we are not suggesting any wrongdoing by Bevington, just illustrating the cosy interconnections of ministers, lobbyists, and vast private capital. And Palantir appears to have played that game too. Just 4 months after Keir Starmer's visit, Palantir UK boss Louis Mosley was invited to join the Ministry of Defence's Defence Industrial Joint Council, described as the MOD's main strategic mechanism for defence sector engagement. And, as Open Democracy has reported, in the months following Starmer's visit to the firm, Palantir hired 4 former Ministry of Defence officials, including an ex-minister. See how this all works? It wasn't long before it all paid off. Just a few months after that private meeting with Keir Starmer, Palantir saw a massive Ministry of Defence contract come its way, one worth £240 million. But it's not just killing robots and spyware that Palantir sells, it's also getting its hands on our health records. And it's been championed by other Labour ministers associated with Peter Mandelson. The Tories awarded Palantir in 2023 a £330 million contract to handle NHS England's patient data. A reminder, this is a company that sells surveillance and warfare technology to Israel for use against the Palestinians, and software to enable violent US immigration and customs enforcement, aka ICE raids, on undocumented people. Its founder, billionaire Peter Thiel, literally named it after Sauron's all-seeing sphere in Lord of the Rings. Since becoming Health Secretary, Wes Streeting has refused to reconsider Palantir's NHS contract, despite a huge groundswell of grassroots campaigning. And Palantir appears to remain the top choice to carry out Streeting's plan to make the NHS more efficient through artificial intelligence, a claim Streeting has not ruled out. But Streeting has himself had a close relationship with Mandelson in the past. We mentioned this earlier in the week, but it's worth repeating. It's an extract from a Guardian article published last month. In the opposition years, as part of attempts to rid Labour of Jeremy Corbyn and his acolytes, Mandelson was a member of a Sunday supper party held at the Kennington home of Roger Liddell, a fellow Labour peer and long-standing friend. Regular guests included the Health Secretary Wes Streeting and his partner Joe Dancy, himself a former Mandelson advisor. Streeting is said to have joked that a blue plaque might be put up outside Liddell's home given its role in the reinvention of Labour. In September last year, Streeting was quick to defend Mandelson after his notorious birthday book to Epstein surfaced.
The fact that he's written this letter to Jeffrey Epstein raised questions about his own judgment.
I think our ambassador has been very clear that he deeply regrets ever having been introduced to Epstein, and given what we now know about his horrific crimes, I mean, who would want to be associated with that sexual predator and paedophile? I don't think we should tar everyone with the same brush and do guilt by association.
Now, with a change in the political weather, Streeting has changed his tune as well.
I think all of us who thought we knew Peter Mandelson regret ever having known him. I think I cannot emphasise enough how angry and bitterly betrayed people, not just in the government but across the Labour Party, feel, because it's a betrayal of values.
But you stood by him, you sort of defended him last year when we already knew that he had a close friendship with Epstein. Do you now regret that?
Well, when Peter Mandelson was appointed as US ambassador, it was on the basis that he'd served successfully as this country's business secretary, that he had served as an EU trade commissioner. People thought he'd done those roles successfully. He'd been prominent in the media as a broadcaster, writing in newspapers. You're right, there had been some scrutiny of the Epstein relationship in the media, but he was continued to be given that platform and respectability.
In the wake of the latest Mandelson revelations, including the leaking of sensitive government information to Jeffrey Epstein, questions are now being quite rightly asked about his relationship with Palantir. Did Mandelson give that company access to sensitive government information whilst he was ambassador? Did he use his role as an ambassador to ease a meeting between the Prime Minister and the company's bosses? And questions are also being asked, by extension, about the relationships between the Prime Minister and other government ministers with the firm via Mandelson. Did they never ask questions about Mandelson's lobbying links to the company that Keir Starmer paid an off-books visit to? And how many other companies and billionaires are there out there with similar links? Green Party leader Zach Polanski has appeared on Newsnight.
Can I say I think there's other serious consequences? So Palantir, this is the spy tech firm, $260 million last month, the biggest defence budget in UK history. That was lobbied by Global Counsel, which was Peter Mandelson's lobbying group, alongside Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, close friend of Peter Mandelson. I've written to the Health Secretary today to say we have to break that contract. It also has crucial data on our healthcare system. So the idea that this defense company from the US has its fingerprints all over our healthcare system alongside Peter Mandelson is a whole range of questions that need answers urgently.
Dahlia, what does all of this say about the relationships between this government and Trump-aligned businesses?
I mean, I think it goes so much further than just this government and the specific Trump administration. It really speaks to the lens through which our world, the economic and political order that we all live in, has been organized through for decades now. I mean, when we read through those files, obviously the primary victim of Epstein and the network that he brokered are the very young women and the girls that were trafficked by Epstein to various powerful men. Their bodies were exchanged as basically vessels that sort of kept of loyalty and secrecy that kept this network together. And those girls continue to be failed because ultimately, who is actually being held accountable? I mean, we can't even get Andrew Mountbatten Windsor to go and testify and say what he knew, which is the one thing that the lawyers representing a lot of these victims have asked for. So obviously the primary victim of Epstein's networks are those young women and girls. But I also think, in a sense, the secondary victim of the kind of networks that Epstein brokered were our society as a whole, because what Epstein was a power broker, and he brokered power between a matrix of people who are literally in the business of making our world worse, who are in the business of concentrating power and resources in the hands of a very small number of people at the expense of all of us. I ask myself, how many alternative futures, have we been robbed of because of these kinds of networks? And, Epstein is the one we obviously all know about. I'm sure there's others that we haven't heard about. But when we think about, for example, the way in which that one-off 50% bankers bonus was spoken about, we're seeing Peter Mandelson, who was meant to be a representative of the British government, trying to meet with an American bank, JP Morgan, to mildly threaten the government to scrap a policy that was largely popular amongst the British public and would have been good for the British public. Why? Because it cuts into the gravy train of the super rich. When we see, the trading of state secrets and state information in order for people to keep a seat at this table of power that Epstein was able to cultivate using the sexual exploitation of young girls, we can see how many times have the policies that we want to see in action, the leaders that we organically support, how many times globally have we seen these policies and movements and leaders sabotaged, sometimes completely in a way that feels very inexplicable, sabotaged and smeared. And it's because of these kinds of relationships and loyalties between largely men, but not just men, who are loyal to nothing but one another and nothing but the system that continues to make them rich.
What's interesting is I was watching LBC the other day, and it was Andrew Marr with John McDonnell saying, oh, well, there's always been these conspiracy theories on the Labour left about all of these connections between private capital and the Labour right. And I'm like, that's not a conspiracy theory. What you're describing, Andrew, is a conspiracy. what you're describing is the reality of what these people are like, and they do have these huge connections to private capital. Peter Oborn's done really good work about the changing face of how politics work in this country, and especially during the New Labour era, where party conference ended up being changed, essentially, so that rather than being about a meeting of members and a place to set policy, there became a place where they would dine and schmooze all the different people from the private sector who they wanted to get close to the government. And that's not changed. The Labour right is the legacy of the Blair administration, which is where all of these people, all of these high-profile grandees, and all of these political connections come from. It stands to reason why Tony Blair himself nowadays has his Tony Blair Institute, where he has all of these other connections through lobbying and all the other super-rich people, and is somebody who's pushing all of these billionaire AI companies to get close to the government as well. So it is very interesting that, again, the left were just correct too early. Cursed to be Cassandra once again.